There was a video going around recently from Combat Self-Defense where the guy wanted to make the bold claim that there are only 3 fighting styles that work. And a handful of people, I'm not going to say a lot, a handful of people directly asked me for comment on it. And I mean, we're not talking like some major, hey, can you make a video on this? But I thought it was a good video topic. And so this is not necessarily a response to that video, but it is in a sense a criticism because he opened himself up for it. Now, I don't watch this guy's channel. I don't really know who he is. I don't even really disagree with the logic of his argument. I think that the logic of his argument is relatively sound, if a little bit, perfunctory for the modern audience. However, he makes the claim that he is choosing his words very carefully. And it turns out he's actually choosing his words very, very poorly. And so my argument is not with his ultimate argument or with his perspective. My argument is actually with his word choice. His word choice is not suitable for the argument that he is making. And this is not just semantics. I mean, you can argue that it is, and it is somewhat semantic, but there's more than that, right? There is precedent for these words, and using them incorrectly to make a point does not actually help you make your point. So, first off, he wants to claim that there's a difference between martial arts and fighting style, and I understand where you might come up with this idea, right? Boxers love to say styles make fights or styles make fighters. And there's some truth to that, but I've talked about this several times before. And the fact is that one, like martial arts and fighting styles are these big umbrella terms that don't actually have like clear precedent and history. Oftentimes people will say we use the term martial arts as a translation of Budo or Bujutsu, really. But technically speaking, in English, it probably goes back before that. There is some passage in Chaucer where he mentions the martial arts in reference to knightly preparation for combat. But I digress on that. And then you could say fighting style. Well, here's the problem, right? What we generally refer to as martial arts, i.e., preparing yourself for combat of a certain type or grouping of types, and fighting style are not really two separate things. They kind of go hand in hand. And the reason for this is that martial arts as a phenomenon, right? When you look at the word art, and I've talked about this till I was blue in the face, and I guess I'm going to keep talking about it. Art does not mean like arts and crafts. Art does not mean creative self-expression. It doesn't mean that at all. Art means a learned skill. In fact, art is just a similar form of the word craft. Art and craft are essentially the same terms. Craft is German, art is Latin, but they essentially are addressing the same issue, which we will get to again down here. But the point is that art is a learned skill. In fact, using the term art as an umbrella term for the creative arts came about much later, like in the Renaissance and whatnot. So when we're looking at this, what we have to understand is that martial arts are basically just the, you can say the skills of war, the skills of the military, the skills pertaining to the domain of the Mars, the god of war, which is really the ultimate definition there. It's combat skill, right? And that's what it is, right? Martial arts is combat skill. Now, you can argue that, and I've made this point as well, right? Combat skills basically fall into kind of like, there are two domains here that have to be addressed. There's the actual toolbox, which you could call technique, and then there's the actual how to use the thing, which is the skill of being able to use it. Now, I'm going to relate this to cooking and music because, one, those are things that I am personally interested in, and two, they are extremely apropos to the argument. The idea is that, one, you have to know what things go together and what things don't. And that's essentially what learning a martial arts system is teaching you how things go together and how things don't go together. It is teaching you about, here are tools and here are the things they do and here are the things they don't do. That's essentially what martial arts are. Now, you can say fighting style is in fact just how you choose to apply them. And again, music and cooking, right? There's the French school of cooking, there's the Italian school of cooking, there's the Chinese school of cooking. There's all of these cultural schools of cooking, and then there are specific there would be specific like chefs' styles of cooking, right? And then there's going to be your personal interpretation, right? So there's multiple levels of what you would consider a style, right? A style is basically a subdivision of a larger umbrella thing. Now you could say that means that martial arts and fighting styles are two different things, and sure, here's the problem. Nobody is teaching a martial art without teaching a style or a grouping of styles, right? Because they are going to have their own perspective and their own experiences that lend them to have a specific style. And whether intended or not, their students are largely going to adopt at least some characteristics of their teacher's style. So we have these things which, now I would argue you don't really necessarily have like cultural or national level martial arts. We just, like, you could kind of say that, but kind of not really. But let's just go ahead and say that there's a cultural level of martial arts. There's kind of a regional ethos of this is how people fight, and thus they come up with solutions to problems according to this context, right? So there's going to be a cultural level style. Then you come down to, there are going to be like school or teacher level styles, meaning the people who have found success and have begun taking on students are going to be teaching the things that they found success with, which means that the methods or the style that they chose to employ is going to be passed down to the next generation of students. So you have kind of a teacher or school level of style. And then from that, you are going to have the individual level of style, which is what the boxing thing is talking about, right? There's how you as an individual apply it to your strengths and weaknesses, to your own body, to your own temperament. And so style is not a particularly well-formed term, but the problem is that, like, while that's all well and good, and you can say, well, sure, okay, so martial arts and fighting styles are different. They are, but they aren't. But then he goes and labels out what he considers the three major fighting styles. And he says kickboxing, wrestling, and grappling, which he then very, very poorly kind of defines, at least on the grappling side of things. Yes, kickboxing, fine, whatever, right? But the thing is that if you walk into any boxing gym, any kickboxing gym, there are going to be styles of kickboxing, there are going to be styles of boxing, right? And we're not just talking like the cultural schools. Or we're not talking like Muay Thai versus Sanda versus Kyokushin versus Dutch kickboxing versus American kickboxing versus Savate. We're not really talking about that, though we could be talking about that. But that's not really what we're talking about here. What we're really talking about more is, it's almost more like the archetypes. I haven't talked about this in a couple of years, but like the boxing archetypes of, are you aggressive? Are you defensive? Are you long range? Are you close range? Exactly how are you mixing and remixing and employing the skills that you're using? What strategies are you using to your benefit to help you win fights? Because at the level of the individual style, there are a lot of paths up the mountain. But that does not mean that you can take a completely separate toolkit, and I would argue that that's what he's talking about here, is that these are toolkits. You can't take a separate toolkit that does not apply and apply it. Now, if you're talking about MMA, sure, I guess. But the thing is that pure strikers and pure grapplers don't do well in MMA. Everything is mixed. So you don't really have these as styles. Everything has to be mixed. Now, people may lean more towards striking, may lean more towards grappling. But the fact is that you have to learn it all. Mixed martial arts is its own thing. And if you're talking about self-defense and street fighting, well, that's its own thing too. And so you can't really use this delineation. And so this is why I'm saying he had a very, very poor choice of words. Now, this is really what I want to get into, which is wrestling versus grappling. Remember what I said about German and Latin? Well, that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Grappling is a Latin base, wrestling is a German base. Now, you can say it all goes back to Proto-Indo-European, which is actually even just a theoretical language. We don't fully understand if that was an actual language. It just seems to be like the common ancestor of all of these Western languages. Anyway, so grappling comes to us through the French, which of course comes from the Latin. Grappling literally means, like, the word grapple just means hook. Like, it basically goes back to a noun that means the object hook, which by definition, just like, you know, by proxy, using it as a descriptor for what we are doing in what we call grappling, just means you're hooking as opposed to striking. It means that you are grabbing and holding somebody, right? And in fact, a lot of historical systems, Japanese, Chinese, French, which, by the way, a lot of our wrestling comes from French, British and stuff like that, they use the word hold a lot, right? The na in chin na means hold. You know, some of the Japanese words mean hold. You know, like obviously grapple means hook, but then there's this word prise in French that gets used a lot, which means to like take and hold. You know, in English we use the word hold. It's what you're doing is you are grabbing and holding something. You are seizing something. You are, which, you know, in Chinese, right? Chin na, chin is seize, na is hold. But the point is that what you're doing is not striking. What you are doing is that you are grabbing onto somebody, holding onto them, hooking them in a way, whether it's with your hands, whether it's with, you know, gross motor movement, like at the elbows and the armpits, things like that. You're hooking. All right. Wrestling, on the other hand, comes from German, right? And again, goes back through old Germanic and everything and into Proto-Indo-European. And it means to wrench, to twist, to bend, to turn. Wrestling is just a different cultural term for non-Latin based languages to mean the same thing. These words were just used by different cultures to talk about the same phenomenon. Now, I am comfortable with using the term grappling, and I would argue that the term grappling, basically meaning hook, right, is kind of a poetic license way of saying the general phenomenon of what we call grappling, because not all of it is submission based. Whereas I would argue wrestling, because it has the term, like the meaning of to like wrench or twist or turn, you could argue is much better suited to talking about like submissions or resting holds, subdual techniques, things like that, things that would actually cause damage in a more critical kind of circumstance, which is what we see in a lot of the historical grappling systems. Even there, I would disagree with his delineation of wrestling being clinching and takedowns and grappling being you know, holds and pins. He actually has those reversed linguistically. So again, like, they're not really different things. They're words from different languages that are talking about the same phenomenon of non-striking physical manipulation of another human's body to the end of moving their structure around. That's it, right? So they're not separate things. And again, going back to this, right? These are not styles. Those are toolkits. Styles are going to be how you employ those toolkits. They're going to be very different. So really, there's grappling and there's striking. And when we look at historically, they were not mutually exclusive. Most boxing styles before the 20th century had included grappling, meaning clinching and even takedowns. And most grappling styles, if you look at the Japanese, the Chinese systems, you look at some of the old Italian and German systems from the HEMA sources, and all of those involved some striking along with the grappling. So the fact is, they've never been mutually exclusive, and your style would be how much do you mix them and to what end? Are you a close player? Are you a long player? Are you an aggressive player? Are you a defensive player? Are you somewhere in between? Are you a mix of things? How is it, you know, high mobility, low mobility? Style is in that vein. These are toolkits. So that is going to be my rant on this. You know, like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with the guy's ultimate conclusion. I don't necessarily disagree with the point that he's making in the video. What I took issue with, what I take issue with continually, is the fact that he said he chose his words carefully, and he in fact chose his words extremely poorly. So, you know, good point. Do better with your words. And that's it. Talk to you later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this with your friends or anybody else who might be interested in this kind of content. If you happen to be in the Metro Phoenix area, come in for a class or just stop in to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Definitely check out our socials and our website that has all of our contact information and all of the other relevant information. And more than anything, check out our Substack. Our Substack will be containing all of the links that we use to cite and reference in our videos, as well as exclusive training content that will be available for premium members. Memberships are cheap, but you can also sign up for free, and we do have articles for free, and we will have more free articles available for you. It is a fantastic platform for what we are doing here, and we hope to see you over there. So I will talk to you guys later, and look out for the next one. Good journey.